They were on the verge of their first victory. Though the Crusaders had promised to return the city to the Byzantine Emperor Alexius' control, they expected to keep the riches of Nicaea for themselves. But their Byzantine allies were about to pull the rug from under their feet. Along the western flank of the city lay the great Ascanian Lake. Here, early on June 18th, 1097, emissaries of the Byzantine emperor initiated a secret plan to take the city and its spoils for themselves.
The Byzantines had brought their ships onto the lake to help in the siege, but they used their ships for a quite different purpose. They secretly contacted the Turks within the city. They would much sooner surrender peacefully to the Byzantines than be chopped up into little pieces by the Crusaders, who were obviously thirsting for their blood. And when morning breaks, there on the battlements of the city are the imperial flags flying. The city has surrendered.
The sight of the Byzantine imperial banner flying above the city ramparts incensed the Crusader army. They had been double-crossed by their so-called Christian brother, Emperor Alexius.
When Alexius did that deal with the Turks and took Nicaea for himself, the Crusader army felt utterly betrayed. They were furious. The man who they trusted, who was supposed to be their ally, who they would have to trust on the future fights through Turkey and into the Holy Land, had gone behind their backs. This was a very, very bad sign for the future of the Byzantine Crusader alliance.
Robbed of the spoils of Nicaea, the Crusaders packed up their camp and ventured deeper into enemy territory, heading towards Jerusalem. But they were not alone. From the hills, the Turkish Sultan Kilij Arslan shadowed their every step. He had just lost his fortress city. Now, he wanted revenge.
Kilij Arslan, mindful of the injury done him, constantly brooded over the fact that through the Christians he had lost the excellent city of Nicaea. With all his heart he yearned to retaliate and determined to lay an ambush for his enemy.
The Turkish leader would unleash the full might of his fighting force, more than 50,000 men. Scouting the land just ahead of the Crusader army, he found the perfect site for a surprise attack. The epic clash that took place here has become part of Crusader lore. It is known as the Battle of Dorylaeum. Though many have tried, to date, no one has found the real battle site. But John Franz has spent years sifting for clues and now thinks he can pinpoint its exact location.
We know certain things about this battle, but finding it is a different matter. We know that it took place at a junction of two valleys. We know there was a marsh, but the thing that we really know is that this junction of two valleys must have provided an immense amount of space, because at one stage both armies deployed in full battle array, and that takes a lot of room.
Professor Franz is taking the same road used by the Crusaders in 1097. Back then, it was so narrow they could only travel 5 abreast. With 60,000 men, the procession took 3 days to pass any given point. As a result, a vanguard of 20,000 men led by Bohemund became separated from the main body of the army. They ended up camping alone and vulnerable in the very valley chosen by Kilij Arslan for his ambush.
This is really getting very flat and open. I think this looks like a place where two valleys meet. And fact, it really looks like a place where two valleys meet.
35 miles from Nicaea, John France reveals for the first time the long-lost site of the Battle of Dorylaeum, the first major battle of the Crusades.
This really is it. You've got to take away all the modern earthworks, this road. This is a flat plain at the junction of two valleys. It fits all the pictures, it's even slightly damp underfoot. This is it. This is where the battle took place, and we're standing on one of the really decisive battlefields of the Crusading era.
At dawn on July 1st, 1097, tens of thousands of Turks mounted a head-on attack against Bohemund's vanguard force camped alone on the valley bed. At last, on the real battle site, Professor Franz can see exactly how the epic struggle unfolded.
They were all mashed up in the camp, here by the jeep, desperately trying to get their defences up, and charging up at them, up the valley floor, are the Turks.
For one man who fought at Dorylaeum, it was a day he would never forget.
Bohemund said to his men, "Gentlemen, brave soldiers of Christ, you can see that we are encircled and that a hard battle lies ahead. Therefore let all knights go out like men and meet the enemy."
With the Turks streaming through the camp, the Crusaders were pinned down. No matter how many Turks they killed, they were losing more men. As wave after wave of Turkish cavalry swept towards them, they now faced a style of warfare they never encountered before. These were no ordinary riders. These were archers mounted on horseback.
The Seljuk Turks were really first-class archers and very courageous. They attack very quickly. They're very light. Unlike the Western European knights. They have smaller horses, they don't carry too much armors. They were really clever in shooting arrows from the back of the horse, riding at a very fast speed.
This startling new tactic was decimating Bohemund's vanguard force of 20,000 men. But mounted archers were not the only surprise the Turks had in store.
The Turks surrounded us on all sides, throwing darts, casting javelins, and shooting arrows from an astonishing range.
Just how the Turks fired from so far away has never been understood. But buried away in a little-known Muslim text of the time, Dr. Taif al-Azhari has discovered an obscure reference written in ancient Arabic that may solve the mystery. The Naukiya.
The Naukiya were a battalion inside the Turkish army of arrow foot soldiers. The soldier lay down with his back to the ground and he used a huge bow with both muscles of his legs and fired a couple of 100 meters away. Sometimes in the sources we have stories like the sunlight disappeared for a couple of seconds because of the sheer number of the arrows.
Bohemund had already lost some 4,000 men, and now the Turks were closing in for the kill. Desperately, he ordered his men to hold the lines around the camp. But from beyond the valley, help was at hand.
The greater part of the army, under those illustrious and splendid men, Duke Godfrey, his brother Baldwin, and other warriors devoted to God, was advancing swiftly to the aid of their brethren.
With the armies of Godfrey and Baldwin pouring into the valley, the Crusader force swelled to 55,000 men.
The Turks found themselves, potentially at least, between an anvil and a hammer. And rather than face that, they broke and fled, very sensibly.
The sheer number of the combined Crusader force had overwhelmed the Turks.
But it has to be said, the Turks fought brilliantly. Who would ever have praised so much the Turks, said one of the Crusaders, who were such fine soldiers, and had they been but Christians, would have been the equal of us.
The Crusaders believed they were now invincible. One confidently wrote home to his wife to say they should all be at the gates of Jerusalem in just 5 weeks. He couldn't have been more wrong. In just over a month, he would still be hundreds of miles from the Holy City, and hundreds more would be dead. Not from battle, but from the perils of the journey itself. The Crusaders had successfully defeated the Turkish army of Kilij Arslan at Dorylaeum. But their leaders feared another ambush. Instead of following the most direct route to the Holy Land, they opted for a more circuitous path that would take the whole procession across the anti-Taurus mountains. A few years later, one young knight recalled the perilous journey.
We began to cross a damnable mountain, which was so high and steep that none of our soldiers dared to overtake one another on the mountain path. Horses fell over the precipice, and one beast of burden dragged another down.
Compelled to travel in single file, it took them 3 weeks to cross the mountains. And the worst was yet to come. Already exhausted, they headed down onto the arid plains of Pisidia, and 90-degree heat.
The land was deserted, waterless and uninhabitable. We suffered greatly from hunger and thirst and found nothing at all to eat.
More than 500 of both sexes died at this time, prostrated by suffering. Most serious of all, their trusty steeds, companions in battle, on whom their masters depended for their own safety, and whose glory should be seen in prancing hoof and gleaming teeth, gave way like common beasts of burden.
After months of this torturous journey, there was one notable casualty: Gotthilda, the wife of one of the chief commanders of the crusade, Baldwin, the Count of Bologna.
Gotthilda was a very, very wealthy woman. She would have held estates and had finances that Baldwin, as her husband, would have had a route into. If she died, these would go back to her family. He wouldn't have access to her. They would stay with her bloodline. Her death means...
The Crusaders packed up their camp and ventured deeper into enemy territory, heading towards Jerusalem. But they were not alone. From the hills, the Turkish Sultan Kilij Arslan shadowed their every step. He had just lost his fortress city. Now the great Ascanian Lake. Here, Early on June 18th, 1097, emissaries of the Byzantine emperor initiated a secret plan to take the city and its spoils for themselves.
The Byzantines had brought their ships onto the lake to help in the siege, but they used their ships for a quite different purpose. They secretly contacted...
They had been double-crossed by their so-called Christian brother, Emperor Alexius.
When Alexius did that deal with the Turks and took Nicaea for himself, the Crusader army felt utterly betrayed. They were furious. The man who they trusted, who was supposed to be their ally, who they would have to trust on the future fights through Turkey and into the Holy Land, had gone behind their backs. This was a very, very bad sign for the future of the Byzantine-Crusader alliance.
Robbed of the spoils of Nicaea,
The Turks within the city, they would much sooner surrender peacefully to the Byzantines than be chopped up into little pieces by the Crusaders, who were obviously thirsting for their blood. And when morning breaks, there on the battlements of the city are the imperial flags flying. The city has surrendered.
the sight of the Byzantine imperial banner flying above the city ramparts incensed the Crusader army. They were on the verge of their first victory. Though the Crusaders had promised to return the city to the Byzantine Emperor Alexius' control, they expected to keep the riches of Nicaea for themselves. But their Byzantine allies were about to pull the rug from under their feet. Along the western flank of the city,